I'm Tracy Sable tonight on EWTN News Nightly, standing strong. The recovery begins in Hawaii following deadly wildfires. We have an update on the Catholic Church that was spared from the blazes. The power of one. New developments in a Republican senator's push against the military's pro-abortion measure. Eye on Asia. President Joe Biden hosts two leaders at Camp David. How China is responding. And chalking up a win. Pro-life reaction to an appeals court ruling regarding an incident in Washington, D.C. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the Feast of St. Helena. Our top story tonight, Hawaii is showing signs of recovery after the deadly wildfires that killed more than 100 people. Schools are reopening and traffic is moving again, but the search for the remains of those who died continues. And a high-ranking state official has resigned following his actions during the blaze. Herman Andea faced heavy criticism after he refused to activate emergency sirens during the wildfires. He says the warnings could have caused people to travel toward the fires. Critics say the alert could have saved lives. Meantime, there are also developments about a Catholic church that was in the middle of the fire and appears to be unharmed. Joining me now is the principal of Sacred Heart School in Lahaina, Hawaii, Tonata Lolesio. Tonata, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it, and please know that we continue to pray for all of you there. First off, how are you doing? I know it has been very traumatic, and it's an experience that will likely take a very long time to recover from.
Thank you for inviting me on your show. And it is still taking time to process because there's so much that changes each and every day. And, the people here, there are needs that need to be met. And, and one of them is to try to get the students back into school. But at the same time, we've come together to pray, to celebrate Mass, and just to be a support system for each other during this time. But there is really still a lot that we've got a long road ahead.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I know it's a really tight-knit community there. And as principal of the school, I'm sure you're really close with the children and their families as well. How are they doing? What are you hearing from them?
I've made myself available at the Mission Church throughout the week so that they can come, and if they're able to come and see me, I miss them. I want to make sure they're safe. I've asked my teachers to reach out to their students and families to, for a wellness and safety check. And later today, we're going to regroup and see, how that comes out. We're hoping and praying that everyone is safe. So if your teacher hasn't reached out to you, families of Sacred Heart School, please try and reach out to them. So far, everyone seems to be safe, but we still need to work on our list. But the families that have come by with the children, they clearly have been affected, even if they were not in the Lahaina town where the firestorms were, but rather in my area, the northern part of West Maui, where we weren't affected by it, and we still have our homes. The families that do come with their children, you can see that they have been affected because they're the most vulnerable in these types of disasters. Displaced families, their schools burnt to the ground, they're separated from loved ones and friends and traumatized due to the experiences they've had. Some have to move off island and have already done so. So, they are going through a great deal, but just to see them, to hug them, to reassure them that we're there for them and that we want to get them back into a learning space where they can be with friends or children there, in their age group, and be with teachers and see counselors and therapists that will help them get through this difficult time. That's the goal.
Yeah, and I'm sure it is really just one day at a time for everyone there on the island right now.
Yes, it is one day at a time, but the generosity and the outpouring of community support has just been amazing. And like you mentioned, the tight-knit community, this is the first time something to this magnitude had ever happened, and I'm glad that the people that are staying to help rebuild this community are remaining resilient through their faith and love and support of each other, and it focused on the children are kind of our way of hope that we can rebuild, and one of the ways to do that is to get them into school, and and help them just be in a different environment, but also give parents an opportunity to plan and sort things out.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing before we wrap up, I want to talk about, speaking of hope, I know the Maria Lanakila Church that your school is attached to really seems to be completely unharmed by the fires. I mean, that's rather miraculous. What did you think when you saw that?
Father Kuriakos, the pastor of Maria Lanakila, and I were together at the time that we received the first social media image of Maria Lanakila, and we were filled with so much joy. Seeing that she was just absolutely beautiful and untouched, Maria Lanakila, Our Lady of Victory. And, there was an opportunity to get photos from the inside of the church. And if you thought the outside was untouched and looked beautiful, the inside was just, for lack of a better word, was just immaculate. Even the flowers at the altar looked just as fresh as it were the day they were placed there. So Maria Lanakila stands.
That's amazing. Yeah, absolutely amazing. And that's so wonderful to hear. Tonata, thank you so much for your time and for coming on, and we really appreciate it, and God bless you. We continue to pray for all of you. 5 months and counting, that is how long Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville has been blocking several hundred military nominations over the Pentagon's abortion policy. And that number is growing. Neither side is backing down, and there is no end in sight. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales continues to cover this story and has the latest for us now. Eric.
Good evening, Tracy. The number of holds will exceed 350 by the time the Senate returns to session after Labor Day. 3 service branch heads and a new Joint Chiefs chairman await confirmation. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin insists that the holds are harming the military and must stop.
This is unprecedented. It is unnecessary, and it is unsafe. And this sweeping hold is undermining America's military readiness.
Not so, says Senator Tuberville's office. Staff released information showing senators, including Democrats, have held up or even threatened to block military nominations more than a half a dozen times since the 1990s. Since March, the Pentagon has been offering service members time off to have abortions and pay travel expenses. Senator Tuberville has been telling me there's an easy fix.
Change the policy back, because it's an unlawful policy. Change it back to what it was for the last 40 years. And then whatever the Pentagon and the Democrats want, bring it to the floor and let's vote on it. If it passes, it passes. If it doesn't, we stay with the past policy. It's that simple.
Just this week, a Pentagon spokeswoman doubled down on their opposition to the Alabama Republican.
No, we're not going to change our policy on ensuring that every single service member has equitable access to reproductive health care. The department does not have an abortion policy. We have a health care policy, and we have a travel policy that allows for our service members to take advantage of health care that should be accessible to them.
Senator Tuberville tells me the majority of Americans don't want their taxpayer dollars being used to fund abortions, and Democrats want to get around the Dobbs decision any way they can.
But they could care less. They're trying to push this agenda down our throat. They might get a lot of stuff done, but they know can get this done. They're going to have to run through me, not over me.
Senator Tuberville tells me that it's up to Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to allow confirmation votes on the Senate floor, a process that would take about 3 hours each. But floor time will be in short supply come September as Congress tries to avoid a government shutdown. I'll stay on top of the issue at the Capitol. Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
A federal appeals court has upheld the block of a law in Idaho that prevents biological men from participating in women's sports. Idaho's measure was the first of its kind in the United States. Lawmakers passed it in 2020, saying it would protect fair competition in women's sports. It applies to teams sponsored by public schools, including colleges and universities. While the Biden administration calls it a big deal and a historic event, today President Joe Biden sat down with the leaders of Japan and South Korea for a trilateral summit. They all agreed to a new security pledge. U.S. officials were quick to point out, though, it is not a NATO for the Pacific, but China isn't buying that. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, President Joe Biden, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida all gathering today at Camp David, the presidential retreat in Maryland, about 65 miles or so from the White House. And the big concern at the summit, the main concern, China and North Korea.
President Joe Biden welcomes South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida to Camp David. As they shake hands, the president asking both men,
ready to get some lunch?
But much more than lunch. On the summit's agenda, the three leaders today tightening their country's security and economic relationship. President Biden started the summit saying that strengthening the ties between our democracies has long been his priority.
That's because our countries are stronger and the world is safer. Let me say that again. Our countries are stronger and the world will be safer as we stand together.
While North Korea's persistent nuclear threats and China's provocations are a major concern for the three countries, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan earlier telling reporters before the summit the goal is to enhance regional stability and security.
This summit today, this partnership is not against anyone. It is for something. It is for a vision of the Indo-Pacific that is free, open, secure, and prosperous.
The key takeaway, the three countries agreeing to a new duty to consult commitment. Should a crisis or a threat pop up in the Pacific, they'll all consult with each other. President Biden addressed reporters when the summit ended.
We're doubling down on information sharing, including on the DPRK's missile launches and cyber activities, strengthening our ballistic missile defense cooperation, and critically, we've all committed to swiftly consult with each other in response to threats to any one of our countries from whatever source it occurs.
In addition, there are plans for a three-way crisis hotline, joint military exercises, and to make the summit an annual event. Now, China, for its part, very critical of the summit, saying it will increase tensions. They're worried about a Pacific version of NATO. Meanwhile, President Biden heads to Nevada tonight, and then next week he heads to Hawaii. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including backlash from customers. An American Superstore reports its earnings after promoting merchandise for Pride Month, and it's way off target. And Bidenomics reaction on the Inflation Reduction Act 1 year in the making. A retail giant Target posted its first sales decline in 6 years. This after customers boycotted the Minnesota-based franchise for pushing so-called Pride Month merchandise. Some of the clothes were designed by a UK transgender man who also includes satanic themes in his apparel. Well, Michael Seifert, founder and CEO of conservative Amazon alternative Public Square, said, quote, "As it turns out, working with Satanists to push transgenderism on children was not a wise business strategy." While this week marks the 1-year anniversary of President Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, Democrats say that it has worked and inflation is down. Republicans have a counter argument. They say the plan known as Bidenomics is not working and instead is hurting American families. Joining us now is Paul Dykewicz, editor and columnist at stockinvestor.com and editorial director of Eagle Financial Publications in Washington, D.C. Paul, great to have you back on. Good to see you. A lot to get to today, but first, let's talk about Bidenomics. I mean, the president has been out and about promoting his administration's economic plan, of course, and says it's working, but it doesn't seem that many Americans feel the same way. I mean, what say you, Paul? Do you think we're on the right track here?
Well, I'll avoid the political commentary and I'll focus on the numbers. Inflation is up. It's high. You've had interest rates now rising. In fact, mortgages are now averaging over 8%, the highest level in 21 years. So if you're looking for a home, the numbers would tell you that the policies are not really working. The rates are continuing to go up. If you're in an existing home, you're a saver who's getting extra money, maybe with a CD that's paying 5% or more, you're probably thinking that's maybe not such a bad thing. But it really hurts the folks on the bottom, which is typically not the way the Democrats want to operate. So anyways, I don't know how well it's going to work for him politically. Obviously, the polls haven't been in his favor. You've got a Republican possible candidate who might win the nomination, President Trump, again, still looking like he's pretty strong without any real competitor who seems to be coming up close to him in terms of the polls. But yet they both have flaws. So we'll just have to see what happens ultimately. But clearly the numbers are showing that inflation's not under control. And if you're looking for a house, you're going to feel that bite when you see what your interest rates will be. For 15-year mortgages, the fixed rate's above 7% right now. And for 30-year mortgages, above 8%.
Yeah, and also a conundrum for those who are looking to sell their homes, I'm sure.
Well, that's true, too, because you still have to pay interest rates unless you're going to be able to buy a house with cash. And very few people can do that.
Yeah. Also, according to a recent report by the San Francisco Federal Reserve, it says Americans are depleting their savings and cash reserves that they built up since the pandemic. What's more, earlier reports found that more and more people were putting their day-to-day expenses on credit cards, causing overall credit card debt to surge to $1 trillion. I mean, Paul, this is all really concerning for American families. I mean, what are they to do?
Well, again, we've talked about debt before, Tracy, in my previous appearances, and it's really a problem if people get beyond their scope of being able to repay it. So the concern is that interest rates can really drive up your debt pretty quickly if they go up, and it's been happening. So I would say just be cautious, try not to spend beyond your means, economize if you need to do it, and avoid going into debt or going deeper into debt if you can control it. Unfortunately, some people don't have that choice. They might need, to spend on, supplies and food and, sending their kids to school and other types of things. Gasoline's been up. So a lot of things that people need that are staple items are getting higher in price. So what's somebody to do? So it's kind of a dilemma. You'd hope perhaps the deficit would get better under control and there would be workable policy solutions and ways to help minimize the problem. But right now it looks like the Fed is probably going to do one more rate hike. At least it'll only be maybe a 0.25% compared to Russia this week, which did a 3% raise, 3.5 or so, and then up to 12%. So they're like double what we're at right now. But that's a war created problem of President Putin's doing. So they've created their own mistakes and they have to live with the consequences. But ideally, we'll get things under control. And you've got a potential contagion from China because of some difficulties there with companies being overextended and not paying people that were expecting to get some compensation. And so these are real worries that there could be ripple effects that could affect the financial system, not just in China and in Russia, but elsewhere.
Paul, real quick, we have like 20 seconds left or so, but any advice for folks right now who are really kind of feeling the pinch?
I would just say be cautious about spending and just realize what your capabilities are to pay back and try not to get into more debt than's necessary. And just try to stay calm, keep the faith and just don't panic. And then if you need some help, seek out people who can give you help. I know people sometimes are going to food kitchens these days, and if they need to do it, it's there. Take advantage of it, and maybe one day they'll be able to help others.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Paul, great to be with you. Wonderful advice. Appreciate it. God bless.
Thank you. You too.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, a tragic incident. An Anglican bishop addresses the recent attack on a Christian colony in Pakistan. Plus, sidewalk heroes, the verdict on pro-lifers arrested while standing up for the unborn. A Christian mother in Brazil has been fined and threatened with losing custody of her son. The claims were made by officials in the Santa Catalina state. This after she homeschooled him and instilled faith-based values in him. ADF International has filed a legal appeal to defend the mother's rights. A protest and calls for action after the riot earlier this week targeted a Christian community and several churches in Pakistan. The protesters were from the country's People's Party. They say all houses of worship should be respected, and an Anglican bishop says the Christian community is deeply concerned about the attacks. He is also demanding action and accountability from Pakistan's government. Well, a recent opinion piece says the D.C. government may be held accountable for a, quote, Black Lives Matter double standard. This after an appeals court this week sided with pro-lifers who had written Black Preborn Lives Matter in chalk on a D.C. sidewalk. Writing in the Daily Signal, Tyler O'Neill says in part, quote, the arrest of pro-lifers only underscores the message that if you don't agree with a government-enforced ideology on race and abortion, you don't have the same rights. O'Neill also says the pro-lifers from Students for Life of America and the Frederick Douglass Foundation were only guilty of, quote, heresy against the state religion. To discuss this recent decision and more, we go to Kristi Hamrick, Chief Media and Policy Strategist for Students for Life of America. Kristi, great to be with you today. Remind us what happened when the Students for Life of America and Frederick Douglass Foundation went to write Black Preborn Lives Matter in chalk on a D.C. sidewalk back in 2020.
Sure. Well, it was a very volatile time, as many people remember. At that point, it was August 2020, and the city of Washington, D.C. had basically been burning for months through Black Lives Matter riots. And the government, the city government, allowed in permanent paint Black Lives Matter to be painted on the city streets, and then other people came along and painted equals defund police. And so we had been involved in a Margaret Sanger project showing the racism of Planned Parenthood and their business model, where most of their facilities are located near minority neighborhoods where there's a disproportionate number of minority lives lost. So we have teams outside of a very sadly thriving abortion vendor in Washington, D.C., pretty much every Saturday. So we filed for a permit to paint Black Preborn Lives Matter on the city street in front of that Planned Parenthood. We were told we could have the permit for an event and that we needed to use temporary paint, not the permanent paint of Black Lives Matter. We're like, fine, we'll do it. We also sent a letter to the mayor to make it clear that we really wanted to join in what was now clearly being allowed, which was expression in public spaces with paint. When we got there, it was like 4 or 5 in the morning. There were tons of police there ready to arrest people who had temporary paint, which we've been told was permitted. So we're like, fine, we won't paint. Instead, 2 of our students got chalk out, and people chalk all over the city, children chalk in Washington, D.C., even today. And they started to write Black Preborn Lives Matter and were arrested, which was astounding. We were talking to our attorneys. The event continued. These 2 young people were just carted away like criminals for what? Chalk, which washes away. And they never even got to write the whole message on it. We came back later with poster board to hold up some signs, but it was viewpoint discrimination through and through. We had the whole thing on video. So we very quickly filed a complaint related to that, and it was thrown out. And this is what I think your listeners will find fascinating. When our case was first thrown out, the judge said it was okay to suppress the speech of peaceful pro-life protesters because we were peaceful. Clearly, they couldn't have a standard for free speech or any kind of behavior with violent protesters. So just being peaceful was the reason they were allowed to kick our case out. That's what we appealed. And we won the right to keep going.
Yeah, what was your reaction when you heard the news from the appeals court?
I was excited. I honestly thought we had a great case. What I was shocked by, everybody who's in and around Washington, D.C. knows it's pretty liberal. I didn't think we would get a unanimous decision where 3 judges voted for us for this case to be reinstated and to proceed. That was exciting. I wanted to believe that the Constitution still counted in our nation's capital, but I honestly wasn't sure.
Yeah. Kristi, we have about a minute left, but what comes next in this case? And what do you think this all says?
Well, Students for Life feels very strongly that free speech rights you're not permitted to use don't exist. We're going to keep fighting because these kinds of attacks, last year, the attacks on student free speech tripled. We've been in court all over the country. The DC government can appeal this case, or they could let it proceed, or frankly, they could settle. They could admit that they were wrong. They could allow peaceful pro-life speech in Washington, D.C., and that would be a win for everybody. So we don't yet know how the district is going to respond, but I can tell you that we are not going to drop this matter. Viewpoint discrimination is unconstitutional, and peaceful pro-life individuals have every right to say that Black preborn lives matter wherever they want.
Yeah, and Kristi, we are going to continue to follow this case. We thank you for coming on. God bless.
Thank you.
And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, now known as X, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.